All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us today. Extremely glad to see that quite a lot of you have actually joined us already, sharp at 6, which is pretty decent. And I'm hoping that there will be some of you who will join us as we go along as well. This gives me the perfect opportunity to put on the suit in times like this where we can't get out of the house. So I'm actually more grateful for this webinar than most of you would be. Welcome. Welcome to the first in the series of FAIR Dialogues hosted by the FAIR Project. For those of you who are not aware of the FAIR Project, the project was started by the 8 Goals 1 Foundation with an aim to promote the FAIR way of thinking. FAIR, that is F-A-I-R, propagates a process where F stands for fact-finding and familiarizing oneself. A stands for arguing and advocating for the other viewpoint. I stands for introspecting and interrogating yourself. And R for reasoning and rationalizing with yourself before reaching a conclusion. The core of this methodology can be described as self-introspection driven by active dialogue and analysis to inculcate a mindset that focuses on what is right for all and not what merely benefits a few. Our aim is to introduce a thought process which ensures fair decision-making and helps those who want to impact change do so fairly. In our journey, we at the 8 Goals 1 Foundation are extremely glad to have the support of the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office. And today's guest, who technically I should not be calling a guest because he has effectively been a part of this journey ever since we decided to run a residential program for the FAIR Project. But nevertheless, we are delighted to have him to speak with us at our first FAIR Dialogue. Mr. Juan Pablo Ramirez-Miranda, who I will be referring to as JP hereafter, is the head of social and human sciences at the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office. I first met JP when he had just landed in the country and was still looking for a home for himself. It's not been that long since then yet, and I don't know what it says about me, but there are already so many issues on which his knowledge of India ends up catching me by surprise. Hi, JP.
Hi, Ramit. Very nice to be here. Very nice to see you and to enjoy this Friday evening with you. And
Perfect.
All the participants here, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. Before we have you address everyone who's here, just a few quick notes. The way we will structure this conversation is that we will first have JP make his introductory remarks, following which we have saved up a bulk of today's time to answer questions that all of you may have for him. I must also thank all of you who have sent in questions in advance. We will try our best to address most of them in one way or the other, but please feel free to continue to ask any questions that may come to your mind by typing into the chat box on the right side of the stream. As always, for those of you who are familiar with the FAIR Project, feel free to be vocal about anything that you disagree with respect to what either of us have to say at any time, all right? Finally, we of course recognize that 1 hour is too little time to be affected in change, but we do hope that these 60 minutes will help you in some way or the other, however big or small. With that, it's over to you, JP, to take things forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramit. And I am, again, as I was saying, delighted to be here with you, with all young women and men who have joined us today, mostly those who are interested or committed to the FAIR Project. And of course, the first thing I need to do is to thank you and the 8 Goals 1 Foundation for the invitation to be a part of this webinar. But as you were saying, we are not only a part of this webinar, but we are hand-in-hand partners of the FAIR Project. And that is because we believe in its methodology and its capacity to bring about change in our societies, and of course, to leverage the power of youth and harnessing youth as change makers. That is something that we need more and more, not only in India, but in every corner of the world. Today, we are living, of course, some unprecedented times. And that is why it's great to have this type of forum that allows for us as, let's say, those managing, implementing a project, or in my case, someone from UNESCO working to promote youth empowerment, to bring spaces for youth to become change makers and to influence change in the society because of this specific context that we are living in. I think it's very important to have these spaces and dialogue with young people in general. I mean, for these first introductory remarks, I don't want to take more time to allow for this to be more interactive and to address all of those questions that we have received. As Ramit was saying, we will do our best to address most of them, because all of them are very important and very relevant to the FAIR project, to the mandate of UNESCO, and to the context that we are traversing now. Basically, I just want to go over a few things to show the bigger picture of where we stand today, and within this webinar, what we are trying to do. Basically, as you all may know, UNESCO is the United Nations specialized agency in charge of education, science, and culture. Within science, we have, on the one hand, natural science and social and human sciences, and we are also in charge of what we call the free flow of ideas, that it's communication, information, knowledge management, etc. I am in charge of the sector that it's called social and human sciences, which includes issues such as intercultural dialogue, human rights, sports, ethics of science, bioethics, the promotion of social and human science and humanities, but also the youth program. And UNESCO has a large focus on youth as a cross-cutting priority in all its programs, but also has an operational strategy that allows us as an organization to promote youth empowerment and to partner with youth as change makers to support our mandate and to support our program in general. So basically, that's where our collaboration with 8 Goals 1 Foundation and the FAIR project comes from, not only because we are trying to engage in anything related to youth empowerment, but also because the FAIR project and the 8 goals are closely linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of you have heard, of course, about the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, but I want to give just a brief overview of what are exactly these 17 goals and 169 targets. In a nutshell, the way I call it, and not only me, like everyone calls it like this, the Sustainable Development Goals are the most ambitious agenda in the history of humankind. And if right now we are traversing one of the most critical times in the history of humankind because of this unprecedented pandemic due to the COVID-19, I think we have to find a link between both and to discuss that, because that's the whole point, that now the FAIR project is not only about promoting its own core ideals, but also about how we have to respond and how to be reactive to the new context, because we cannot deny that the pandemic is affecting us all. So basically, the SDGs on the one hand and the pandemic on the other. The SDGs, as I said, the most ambitious agenda in the history of humankind. It is an agreement between all governments, all United Nations member states, who consulted all their societies, every member of their country, and then agreed a way forward, because we realized we cannot continue to live sustainably without, number one, environmental sustainability and addressing all the issues related to climate change, and on the other, peace. Those are the two main goals of the SDGs: building sustainable development and sustainable peace. And the Sustainable Development Goals rely in 3 key principles that I think are very important to have in mind and to put on the table. The first one is universality. And where is this universality principle coming from? You know that the United Nations was born as an organization, and UNESCO followed as a specialized agency within the United Nations system as a result of what was at the time the biggest challenge for humanity and the worst thing that had happened to us, that was the Second World War. So basically, as a result of the Second World War, we all came together and decided that we needed to have a forum to stop for those atrocities and that level of death to repeat itself due to conflict. So basically, the United Nations was born. And later on, one of the key, let's say, purposes of the United Nations was not only peace, but we realized that we also needed to promote development. Because when we are all not heading towards developing and better standards of living, we cannot achieve a sustainable peace. When we put those 2 links together in the equation, we realize that we need to work also for development. Later on, when industrialization continued to reach different corners of the planet, etc., we realized that development could not be development by itself, because if we deplete all the available resources we have in our planet, because we all know the laws of physics that tells us that there's no more resources than what we already have here, we realized that we cannot just talk about development, but we have to talk about sustainable development. So basically, this change of paradigm came at the beginning of the millennium, and we had first a large agenda that was called the Millennium Development Goals, that was focused on eradicating poverty as means for achieving all of these ideals. But then we started to realize that we had also some environmental challenges, and the paradigm of sustainable development became the norm for these international commitments and international agreements. And in 2015, the SDGs came about. And basically, that is universality, one of the principles I was addressing earlier, came because we cannot think that a development agenda only concerns those who are on the lower end of development. So like countries on the south, or least developed countries, or developing countries or economies. We realized that we needed for everyone to do their part. So these Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, have universality as a principle, because this time around, this is for everyone to do. Every country on earth, every government, and every member of their societies needs to chip in and to work towards this. The second principle that this agenda is built on is the principle of leaving no one behind, because of course we cannot achieve this if we are not bringing everyone into the equation. And this is obviously related to inclusion and to addressing the needs of the most vulnerable. And the third and final principle that I wanted to share with you today is that of interconnectedness. I would say it like this, that we cannot focus only on one single goal, because in order for us to achieve all the ideals and what we want to strive, what we want to achieve with this agenda, we have to work on all of the goals together. We cannot prioritize the achievement of one over the other because of their interconnectedness. So basically, that's where we stand today, 5 years after the launch of this ambitious agenda that by 2030 wants to achieve all of this. And it's not an easy task. It was not an easy task. And of course, just to give also a bit of context, this is not something that the United Nations can do by itself. This is not something that governments alone can do or societies alone can do. This is something that, given that we live in an interconnected world, and this has been certainly evident as we traverse the pandemic, that everything that happens in one place has an impact on another place, we realized that we need to take action into our hands all together. And basically, this brings us to the pandemic and how, for the first time, the United Nations Development Program is saying that you know that they have been measuring what we call the Human Development Index for a long time. And they created this index that puts together some indicators of how countries are doing in human development. Well, this COVID-19 pandemic, for the first time, will entail a global backslash in the Human Development Index. We cannot yet measure the full scope of the socioeconomic impact that the lockdowns, the quarantines, and all of this impasse for the economy will have in people's lives, but we can already foresee that the Human Development Index itself will have a regression. And that is very important. And this is a long-term thing. And of course, when we are talking about the world of tomorrow, because yes, the ideals of the Sustainable Development Goals, by definition, sustainable development is development that takes into account the needs of tomorrow. Having 2030 as a horizon and this international development agenda that is forward-thinking and thinking about the future brings us to tomorrow. And finally, all of these medium and long-term impacts that the pandemic will have is also inviting us to look at how we will build back, how we will address the socioeconomic challenges that will derive from this pandemic. So we are pretty much obliged to look forward. And when we're talking about the future, who will be those citizens and all of those humans living in the world of tomorrow? Well, of course, the decisions makers of tomorrow are the youth of today. And this is why promoting youth empowerment and working with youth champions, such as all of those interested in the F.A.I.R project, is extremely important. Because I think that we are in, of course, one of the biggest crises that we will probably live through in our lifetimes. But despite all the difficulties and the horrid results of this in terms of not only the death toll, but the socioeconomic challenges for those particularly in most vulnerable situations, we need to also use this as an opportunity for young people to contribute and to be in the conversation of how we need to envisage the world of tomorrow. So we have a pathway that is very clear, that is the SDGs. We have the challenges that we are not even capable of measuring in their entirety yet. That is the challenges related to the pandemic. We have young people in general, that it's the whole world is in many places enjoying its biggest demographic bonus with young people. India is one of the countries with the most young people in the world. And so all of these conditions put us in a very good situation for young people to be at the center of, number one, making the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals a reality, and number two, addressing the socioeconomic challenges that will come from the pandemic, and number three, to devise and define how we can bring about change and a better tomorrow as we start to build back, as we have started to call the transition towards the new normal or the post-COVID-19 context. So I think that to not extend more my introductory intervention, I will stop there. I hope that I have given a big picture idea of where we stand and what is the context of this webinar. And I am really looking forward to addressing some of your concerns and questions through this dialogue that now will begin with Ramit. Thank you very much for listening to me. And again, I am very happy for this to only be the start of a conversation.
Thank you, JP. I think that was absolutely fantastic to set the grounds for the rest of the conversation for today. And I think just from my standpoint, I think I just want to reiterate one of the things that you said, right? I think the Sustainable Development Goals by themselves was a huge challenge that the United Nations undertook, right? COVID-19 or no COVID-19, it was always going to be a tough challenge. It was always going to be an uphill task, right? And that's the same thing that even at the 8 Goals One Foundation, the 8 goals that we've looked at, which also correspond to many of the 17 SDGs, it's something that we all acknowledge that is extremely difficult to achieve, but we have to put in all the effort that we can. And given COVID at this point in time, I think there's a huge need to try and rethink some of the ways that we've been adopting. And as what you said very rightly, right, it's the new normal, trying to figure out all the things that we put into motion prior to COVID. How do we now adapt and make those things achieve the same kind of objective that we sought out to achieve in the first place? So with that, I think let's just jump in straight away to questions. I can see quite a few questions coming up on chat as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one of them and also merge that with one of the questions we had previously. They seem a bit connected. On the chat, we've got Ishan Agarwal, who's asking you whether that, and he's effectively making a statement as well, saying that it's great to consider that we must have universality, as what you had mentioned as well. However, how possible is that with differences in foreign policy around the world, right? And that connects with another question that Kartika Sajeev had for us, and she sent this over via email, was that the challenges faced by developing countries with regards to the SDGs are widely studied and analyzed, right? So when it comes to developing countries, it's something that we hear a lot about, and especially in India, there's a lot of conversation around that. But what she's curious about is the problems that developed countries face with respect to the SDGs and their implementation. So creating that and as what you said, right, the SDGs are for everybody. But it'll be great to hear some of the problems that the developed countries face when there are conversations around SDGs or about its implementation and so on and so forth. And tying in with Ishan's question of how universality can actually be achieved, given that there are so many different foreign policies across the world.
Yes, and I mean, of course, that gives me a lot of ideas to think about. The first thing is that, of course, as you said, this is a very challenging agenda, and it was before the pandemic. And of course, some of the reports and some of the measurement of outcomes that we started to see 5 years on through the implementation of the 2030 agenda already started to tell us that we were not on track for many of the goals, for many of the targets. So a lot more needed to be done. That's why the United Nations actually this year is launching what we call the decade of action for the SDGs, to try to give a stronger push to the Sustainable Development Goals for this second and third tier of the 15 years. Obviously, as I was saying, this agenda was agreed by the United Nations, by all countries coming together at the United Nations, but the responsibility for the implementation relies within each member state, because of course there's issues of sovereignty, and like the organization in every country depends on their states, and they are the ones who establish, let's say, with the support of the UN and with the support of other countries, etc., of course, the mechanisms to implement the agenda and to monitor its progress. And I think that is one of the key issues where we will need to pay a lot of attention going forward, because right now we were lacking some let's say, strength in the capacity to measure our progress towards the implementation of each of the targets. We have in the United Nations developed, of course, a mechanism, a monitoring framework that includes a lot of indicators to try to measure this, but the capacity of countries to measure against these indicators and to utilize the national standards to measure all of these outcomes was not there before the agenda started. So this is also a matter of developing all of this as we go along. Of course, I put an emphasis in this measuring how we are moving forward, because right now, even if, as I was saying, developed countries, or since this was a universal agenda, some countries that were already with a bigger economy or more advanced on certain issues or in certain socioeconomic indicators, etc., 1 year on, 2 years on, they could say, I already achieved this target, this other target. They were already well advanced in some of the targets. Of course, that was not the case for every country, especially even more complicated in those countries at the other end of development. But now, measuring becomes even more important to, number one, address the impact of and the backlash that the pandemic will give to the achievement of these objectives, and to plan a way to recover what was lost and to keep moving forward. So in that sense, since the question was specifically on how can developing countries improve on their implementation of the 2030 agenda, I think that my response to that regard needs to be a call for enhanced international cooperation. And that can happen, of course, at the level of development partners and governments, but also at the grassroots level and at the level of civil society. We have to learn from each other. And in this interconnected world, we cannot let the pandemic result in more looking inward. We need to start learning from each other and try to engage in further exchanges to see what's working well in one place that can be implemented in another. So that is why I think that the best way forward for those that are needing the most is international cooperation.
Perfect, JP. No, thank you. No, I think the one takeaway that I have from that is, at the end of the day, there will be developing countries, there will be developed countries, there will be different foreign policies. But what you mentioned about people on the ground really connecting with each other, civil service organizations, and really individuals and human beings, really, and I actually say human beings connecting with each other across countries, is really a large part of what needs to be done, in my opinion. And that's something that even Shambhavi Singh on chat has just said, and I just want to read this out because it's relevant. She's saying that by connecting like-minded people and empowering each other, we can become powerful stakeholders in affecting how nations shape their foreign policy, right? Which I think is also a fairly good point to make in terms of this conversation.
Yes, and for youth empowerment, Ramit, if I can react to that.
Yes,
because
please.
I mean, that is something that I appreciate a lot within the F.A.I.R project and with our common approach for youth empowerment. That collaboration, we are not the ones providing the empowerment to youth, but the paradigm is that we can be a platform for like-minded people to join hands and work together. And I think that's the important thing, and that is within the spirit of UNESCO's work with youth and also of the F.A.I.R project, that we can be a catalyzer for young people to join hands and interact, because like as we've said in many of our conversations, Ramit, this is about more heads thinking better than one head alone too, no?
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Moving on, I think even in chat, I can start seeing a few questions on gender, which is also SDG 5, and it's also the second goal that we've got at the 8 Goals 1 Foundation as well. The question comes from Jagriti Gupta and Samta Rane, and their question is as such. Feminism nowadays is quite prevalent in society, and at the same time, it is unduly used. So, what is Mr. Ramirez-Miranda's take on feminism? And does he believe that feminism can help the so-called weaker gender and society to uplift their mindset? Additionally, what steps need to be taken to increase women's political representation so that they themselves can be a part of bringing gender equality? I think, JP, before you answer that, just one thing that I wanted to add, and the reason why I think whenever we talk of gender equality, and of course, JP, you'll have what you have to say on this, but when I see some of these questions on the live comments, and I'm looking at Ayush's comment, which says that how do you see a path forward in achieving the goal for equality for all? I think gender rarely becomes that one discriminant right now, which is common across the world, irrespective of whether you're in the developing world or you're in the developed world. It's about, race may not exist everywhere. Divides between economic status may not exist everywhere, but that divide between males and females, men and women, the genders, whether it's two, whether it's the numerous more gender, the other genders that we've got as well, that divide is common across the world. Right. So when you're looking at equality for all, I think gender really plays a very major part in changing that mindset towards achieving equality. So your views on feminism, JP, and about gender equality and how women can get more representation.
Yes, I mean, of course, I have to begin by thanking Jagriti and Samta for their question. And I mean, it is such a large thing to speak about that we could dedicate the whole webinar or a series of webinars to this issue. And let me begin that by saying that they mentioned the so-called weaker gender, but of course, reality has shown that that is completely incorrect. Because right now, during times of the pandemic, of course, the heavy burden has been taken by women. They are staying at home and sharing, not sharing a lot of their responsibilities in terms of care, in terms of workload in the house, etc. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to take this opportunity to do a little commercial. We supported Nandita Das, who is a very famous actress here in India, to do a very nice documentary that it's called Listen to Her. It's a very short film, not a documentary, to addressing all of these issues. So after this webinar, please, on YouTube, just write Listen to Her or Nandita Das Listen to Her, and you can watch it. It's very powerful, and it's speaking about all of these issues. There was a report by UN Women launched a couple of weeks ago that is talking about a shadow pandemic, that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we also have a shadow pandemic of what? A heavy burden on women in terms of paying the load of the pandemic. And number two, a big increase in domestic violence, because, I mean, staying at home also increases the chances of those that are already struggling with domestic violence to see an increase on that. Like in most countries in the planet, there has been an increase in reports of domestic violence across the pandemic. So, I mean, in general, so not at all weaker gender. Number two, this is something completely important and something that we need to think about all the time, that we cannot live in a world where the bigger half of the population is being left behind and is being oppressed by a system that we devised where men hold control, political representation, power, and not only that, but also exerts control over different aspects of women's life. So that is what working for gender equality means. and that is why what all feminisms can do to take this opportunity also to continue their fight as they see fit towards more and more equality. We have to use this opportunity to build back better, and building back better means bringing everyone into the equation. And if we can use the pandemic to continue working on leveraging the power structures and the balance for women to be completely empowered, and to eradicate violence against women, and for gender equality to be a reality, that is what we need to do. There was the question also talked about political representation, and yes, that is one of the targets of SDG 5 on gender equality, and political representation is extremely important. Because, of course, for women's interest, for anyone's interest to be represented, they need to have a seat on the table. And when political representation of women is not there, their interests and what they need and the voices of women will not be there. There has been, you may have all read about those countries led by women doing better in the addressing the pandemic, etc. But further analysis related to that have revealed that it's not just the fact that women are leading and taking the decisions, but in those countries where the conditions of gender equality were conducive to having a woman leader, prime minister, president, etc., are the ones that are dealing better with the pandemic. So it's not only women and their decisions, etc., but it's the society as a whole embracing gender equality that makes it that we deal better with crisis, just like the pandemic. So again, this is the right time to put that as central to our issue. And gender is not a separate thing. Gender is something we can address in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think what everyone on the chat is taking on to, as well as what you said, is the fact that it's really about everyone, right? When you're talking about gender equality, it is about everyone. Everyone has to play their part in some way or the other. And I'm seeing a lot of comments about using different nomenclature: gender equality, feminism, equalism, as Asif is talking about, where he says that if you replace feminism with equalism, it just may end up being accepted more easily. It's, I think, the crux of what he's saying. But and I'm a great fan of linguistics, very honestly, right? But I think gender equality and gender issues is probably the one place where I dislike linguistics, because I effectively end up saying that it's not about what words you're using. It's about the thought process in your mind and the thought process that everyone needs to inculcate. So whether, and I understand the importance and relevance of linguistics, but it's just extremely important for all of us to just understand what equality really means. And once we understand that, then whether we call it feminism, gender equality, we call it women liberalization, men liberalization, whatever we may end up calling it, right? Different people will use different terms, but the objective must be the same. And that's, I think, really crucial with respect to achieving gender equality at some point in time. A great segue from that, JP, and this is something that you and I have discussed previously on multiple occasions as well, is the interlink between gender and sport, right? You know about the YLL, you know about the Young Legends League that we run in the northeast of India, where we run a mixed gender league, where boys and girls play together. There's no separate women's category or girls category or boys category and so on and so forth. And it's fantastic that there are times when girls are outscoring the boys, and it's really not even a question of whether the player on the field is a girl or a boy. Everyone's giving it the best and everyone's doing what they need to do, right? So the question that we've got is by Sambhavi Singh Tomar, who's also on the chat right now and I had messaged previously. She says, when it comes to sport, we've always had a men's category and a women's category. Do you think this division of genders is still relevant, keeping in mind our goals of gender inclusivity? The second part of our question is, how can we make sport more inclusive with regards to gender issues? So this is a tricky one, JP, because from the fact that it is everything is men's and women's category, right? That's how sport is. That's how sport is defined. But it's a tricky question. I'm eager to hear how you have to answer this.
Yes, no, I mean, of course, and it's very important, and I thank them for the question. I mean, of course, sports. Let us begin with sports being something extremely important in today and at the time we are living, because of many reasons. Right now, the attention and all the focus, all the action, and all of our time sometimes, because we are consuming news about this, we are checking data about this, is devoted to what? To health, right? To public health. The government's action right now is, of course, addressing a pandemic that is a disease, an epidemic. Everything is talking about health. And we have seen, and at the same time, people are locked down and in quarantine, so like they cannot move a lot. But we have seen that for this disease and in general for health, there is something that the doctors call comorbidities that are related to obesity, cardiovascular disease. In most countries that are seeing high rates of mortality for COVID-19, all of these comorbidities are associated to what? To habits, and one of those habits is lack of physical activity. So in the world of tomorrow that we need to build, we need to realize that physical activity and sports are extremely important, not only for our physical health, but also for our mental health. Right now, I mean, I'm sharing something personal, but through the lockdown and having to stay at home, etc., I don't know how my mental health would be if I was not lucky to have the habit of doing some sports. And I mean, I do something, I have the privilege of having some space to do it at home, etc. I mean, I just need a yoga mat. That's already lucky enough. But if I didn't have this habit, of course, that would have an impact on my mental health through the lockdown, etc. It may have an impact on my mental health through the lockdown. So I think that sports are something that needs to be promoted and very well considered as we move forward. And then going to the issue of gender and sports, I mean, it's an open discussion. The men-women's categories. I mean, you have all seen also the stories about like trans issues and the hormone levels and associations and the Olympics discussing those issues. Those are all open questions that I think that need to. The voices of those concerned need to be the ones giving like the informed views, and we need to have a lot of conversations and dialogue about that. But the key issue and my take on that is that this is all about opportunities. And this is what we do, Ramit, also in other platforms with Sequin in the National Alliance for Women's Football, and our approach in general to sports and development. This is about not denying the opportunities, because the world today, in many societies, the reality is that women are denied the opportunities to continue practicing sports as they grow up, or like there's many conditions that not allow them to have the capacity to play sports and to continue with physical activity as they grow up. So I think that right now, I mean, we need to talk about women's football. We need to talk about women's sports because of that, because there is an imbalance. So I would continue to advocate for reducing the pay gap, in the gender pay gap in sports, because it's there. So we need to speak about women's sports yet because of those inequalities. So I think that in that sense, that answers the question of why we need to keep having this categorization. I mean, of course, I know that your question comes from the ideal or the potential of some that some people think about of post-gender type of equality, or I don't know, but that's a larger issue and a bigger conversation that we could have. And I mean, to make more inclusive sports regarding gender issues, what we need to do is to give more opportunities to girls. And this is not just a matter of, let's say, simply advocating for it, but this involves a radical shift in the way we think as a society. And of course, it's connected to some practices that aren't contained within our cultures and societies in general, where we prime and value more sports for boys, but it's a vicious circle because, of course, those are boys have better opportunities to have a better career and get paid, and so that's why parents, of course, they would want their boys to do sports because there is that potential, whereas for women there's not. So that complex issue is what we need to do. Society as a whole needs to discuss on how the sports market needs to change, how grassroots sports need to change, how our approach to sports from our house, from the way we grow up and parents educate their boys and their girls, need to change for sports to be something that where equal opportunities are there for boys and for girls.
No, absolutely, and I think that's really the focus that we've always had, JP. And again, we've had these conversations before as well. But change in sport has to come from the grassroots, right? We understand and recognize the fact that if at the top level there is just one category, and having mixed sports event right at the professional level, maybe possible at some point of time, right? And in my opinion, frankly, and I keep saying this to everyone, it's an example that I give, why it will happen at some point in time is because a little known fact, which I always like to bring up, is that Flojo, who holds the world record for the fastest woman to run 100 meters, is still till today faster than 33% of the world's population, right? And that includes all men as well. Right, so 33% of the countries of the world do not have a man in their countries who's faster than Flojo, who's the world's fastest woman, right? And that's a fact. And what adds to the fact is that if she had actually run about 50, 60 years before she ran, she would be the world's fastest human, right? It's a reality. Like the men's record 50 years back was not as fast as what she ran in the 70s, right? So it's really about that opportunity, and that's when you talk about the grassroots, about the opportunities, about our households, about the parents making sure that the girls and the boys play together, they run together, they play cricket in India, they play football, they play any other sports that the girl wants to play. Create that opportunity, and we've seen it happen at the professional level. When the opportunity is given, they will perform, because there is anyone who tells me that, oh no, there's a physical difference between men and women. Sure, there may be a physiological difference between men and women, but in terms of whether women can do what men can do physically, that's something that I've never really understood, because when I look back in history, you've always seen women athletes do as well as what their predecessors were doing about 50 odd years ago, right? But like you said, it's the journey that we need to take, and that's a journey we need to take right from the grassroots. And hopefully, while we're alive, we continue on that journey and see it reach fruition.
Yes, and it's also unfair to judge those differences now after a long history of promoting those differences and those inequalities. Like, so right, we would not know how we would have developed if the equality and those opportunities would have been for everyone there since the beginning.
Yeah, Absolutely. And it speaks of so much more. And I think we can, as what you said very rightly, and I'm going to move on to the next question, because this is something that you and I have always spoken a lot about, and we can speak endlessly about what all needs to be done at a societal level, from a mindset standpoint, in an individual, in the mind of a girl child, in the mind of a boy child, in the mind of parents. There's so much to do around this. But I am going to move on, right?
Yeah.
And try and cover a few more questions, because there are a lot of eager questions that we've got here today. The next question I have is also related to sport, and a bit that you've already covered. So maybe if there's some other point that you'd want to make on it, is the fact that today, at least especially in India and a lot of other developing countries, sport is really looked at as a leisure activity, right? And the focus of schools and colleges are really on learning that will fetch monetary benefits, employability, right? How do you, is there a way that the UN has previously tried to get sports included in curriculum, or find a way to make it more attractive for schools to propagate more, or something like that? So, and this question is by Karthika Sajid.
Yes, I mean, actually, not a lot of people know that, but UNESCO is also like tasked with sports, and we are like one of the leading UN agencies in sports, basically because we are the secretariat of the Forum of Ministers and Authorities of Sports coming together to discuss that, and they have come together to do what we call the Kazan Action Plan, that it's like a tool for countries to implement sport policies as not only as a tool for development, but to advance their agendas in general. And I mean, of course, that we are doing a lot to try to promote this. And I think that, like, something that I even said very recently in another forum is that we need to harness the power of sports for development and peace, And I think that the context is very adequate, because exercise, as I was saying already, is essential for good health and mental well-being. So if we keep the focus on the word essential, that right now we are reopening economies and focusing on what is essential and what's not, and that may be part of the new paradigm we're heading towards. I think that physical activity and sports and its role on health needs to be considered essential. And one of the things that we are actually also doing that it's very important to keep in mind is that sports can allow us to promote a certain set of values that are intrinsic to the practice of sports, that actually correspond with the values that we have all needed as societies to go through the pandemic and the lockdowns and quarantines. The values of sports that we promote, and because they are there, but it's just that a shift in attention needs to happen for us to realize how through education and with quality physical education, we need to measure and harness all of these values, are solidarity, for example, because that is natural in team sports. Inclusion, because that can also be, because we also learn about rules and about fair play, etc. with sports. Sharing, because like everything is like related to sharing winning and sharing defeat also, and pushing one's limits and discipline. All of these values that we promote through quality physical education are exactly the values that we needed to go through this pandemic. So I think that we can continue to promote the power of sports to continue enhancing in our societies and in each of us all of these values that have been key to our going through these difficult times. No, that is pretty much what I have to say for this question, Ramit.
Thanks, JP. I think a common theme of a lot of these questions and these answers, and I think and it's a bit that I'm sensing from the room as well, is that a lot more conversation needs to keep happening, right? Now, these are all thoughts, that ideology is there, the concepts which everyone needs to keep talking about regularly, and that's really what we need to continue to do. And so, but when it comes, even while we do that, and we've spoken about the grassroots, we've spoken about how these conversations are important at each and every level. The next couple of questions that I have, which I'm going to actually plug together right now, are from Sony and from Latisha Deshpande. So they ask in their different ways, and I'm clubbing it together as I read. Given the fact that we are in COVID situation right now, and that's what we started this conversation with, JP, and given that current situation, when we're looking to restore it back to normal, when we're looking to get the conversation back to where it needs to be and where it ought to be, and when we're trying to implement these goals, when we're trying to implement fairness, what are the steps that we need to take to stay on track? What are the steps that we need to take to be able to figure out how do we realign ourselves? How do we, perhaps how UNESCO right now is, because I'm sure you would have had a plan before COVID, right? And there would have been things that you would have planned out for the year that you had to do, you had to achieve. And now all of us are trying to reprioritize, and there's a lot of reprioritization happening. So is that really what it is? Is it reprioritization, or is it just changing the approach towards the priorities which remain the same, really?
I mean, the idea is that the roadmap remains the same, and at least from the UN perspective, we have the Sustainable Development Goals there as the pathway to achieve sustainable development and to achieve peace. Because yes, the pandemic is the biggest challenge that we will probably face in our lifetimes. I hope there's nothing worse. But I mean, the point is that when this lockdown, when this quarantine, when this pandemic recedes, imagine tomorrow we will have a vaccine treatment and we will manage to control this. Issues such as the climate emergency, issues such as conflict and war in many places of the world, issues as violence against women that we already discussed, will still be there. So we need to take the time to assess what we can do better after this experience that we went through as a humanity and as societies, but also to continue working towards those objectives that we have clarity that need to be done. And I mean, in terms of like the steps or the advice that I would give, particularly for young people, I mean, the first thing is engaging on all of those values. We have right now the risk and tension of trying to look inwards instead of realizing that the magnitude of this pandemic was also the result of our world being interconnected and no turning back in that regard, because we are covering almost the whole planet as humanity, and we depend on one another, and we need to find solutions through cooperation and engaging with everyone. The risk of going back to looking inward and thinking that within our closed spaces we will find solutions that for problems that come from global implications, I think would be not the best path forward. And of course, two things come to my mind that we need to keep in mind. Number one is the promotion of civic engagement, for sure. Young people need to be out there and devising the type of actions and policies that they would want to see, and of course trying to win spaces within the civic space to make this a reality. And civic engagement is something that we can build all together, and that is what we call global citizenship, like realizing that promoting all of these values, solidarity and working together and living together, is realizing that everything needs to happen, of course, at the local level and in our communities, but that is what connects us together. The noble goals that we have facing us. And the second thing that comes to my mind is, of course, the need for us to harness better the power of technology, because we are living in a world where we have technology. We have all of these advances. I mean, look at this. We are locked down still in India, and we are managing to have this conversation, Ramit, you and I, with everyone listening, and we received all of these questions. How this would not have been possible, what, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Like getting all of these questions, having a compendium of the minds of all of these young champions and leaders, and exchanging on this while they'll look at us through a screen. Oh my God, the world we're living in, where technology is there, this is something that we need to harness, and we need to use technology for us that already have access to it, but also technology itself as a driver of inclusion and further equality. Because right now, of course, there are a lot of people out there who don't have the privilege of having a smartphone in their hands, or data or broadband available to have the quality of video exchange that we have right now between us. So again, civic engagement, technology, and taking the time to reflect on how to build back better, but remembering that the path toward peace and sustainable development is still there.
Yeah, no, I think spot on, JP, and I think that's really the message to everybody on this group and who's listening in right now. That it's about everyone's voice, it's about everyone's conversation, it's about every small little thing that everybody does, and all adds up to the bigger things. There will always be the bigger things that make an impact, and there will always be the smallest things that create that large ripple effect, which then creates the kind of impact that everyone wants to make. We're good on time. We've just hit the hour mark, JP. But I'm not going to let you go already, because I do have one final question for you. Before I ask which, I think one thing that I've noticed from just the way that the comments have been coming is, at some point in time, I think we will have to do a separate session on gender and on equality, because that's really something that clearly everyone has comments on and views on. And as I said, both of us can talk about it for days on end. So at some point in time, we will probably trouble you again and get you back to have a conversation around that, right? Till then, before you leave for today, my last question, which I have to ask you as part of the FAIR project, is what your personal idea of fairness is. Now, if you take off the UNESCO hat for now, and asking JP this question, to you, for everything that you've been through in life, you've grown up, you are where you are right now. What do you see fairness as?
I mean, for me right now, it's difficult to take off my hat, because of course everything that I've said today are things that I believe on, especially when I am participating in events where my audience is youth, etc. I rarely prepare like for other forums my typical talking points and fixed lines. I tend to let myself speak from the heart, because I think that's a bit more fair to a young audience, also because, I mean, I still think of myself as young, and I want to connect in a very more personal and direct way. My idea of fairness, I mean, it's on the one hand connected to leaving no one behind, and on the other, I think of sharing the privilege, because in that sense, we don't live in a fair world today, and that is, I know that is connected to the objective of the FAIR project and your own idea of fairness. Today, we unfortunately don't live in a fair world. We didn't choose to be born with all of this privilege. We could have been born as one of those who are struggling there. And I think that the idea of fairness is about sharing. I'm not saying necessarily that it implies giving away our belongings or donating to a charity. That can be part of it for someone who wants it. But I think it's more about the mentality of sharing what we have, and also promoting the no one should be left behind, and everyone needs to have a share of everything the world has to offer.
Thank you so much, JP. Thank you so much for all your time. And it's at least it's been a pleasure to hear everything that you have to say. And I hope that's the same for everyone who's been listening in. To all of you, I think one thing that I definitely want to say is that keep the conversation going, right? We're here to listen. JP is here to listen. I'm here to listen. Everyone at the FAIR Project is here to listen. You've got our email ID. You've got our social media handles. Keep the conversation going, whatever it is. And I know there are a lot of things that you did write on the chat which we weren't able to cover. Hopefully we will at some point in time. None of this is getting forgotten. It's all stuff that we will address at some point in time for sure during the course of this journey that we are now on. Right. So thank you so much for everyone's time. Thank you so much, JP. I think it's been an absolute pleasure.